My name is Dr. Lauren Mitchell, and for most of my adult life, I've been defined by two things: medicine and marriage. Healing people has been my profession, loving Leo has been my purpose. At least, that's what I told myself for years, long after the truth began to shift beneath my feet. I was 26 when I married him. Back then, Leo Mitchell was not the polished businessman he is today, but an ambitious dreamer with nothing more than a cheap suit, an eager smile, and a head full of promises. I had just started my residency at Mount Sinai, exhausted and hopeful, buried in textbooks and night shifts. Leo was a small-time broker, barely scraping by in Manhattan's cutthroat financial district. He said he wanted to build an empire, and I believed him. Believing him was my first mistake. I gave up opportunities for him, turning down a fellowship in Boston, skipping international research trips, even straining relationships with my parents who thought I deserved more than a man who couldn't keep a job for longer than 6 months. But Leo was magnetic. He had that intoxicating charm, the kind that could convince strangers to hand over business cards, drinks, or secrets. I thought we were partners. I thought we were building something together. Years passed, and the empire came. Not through grit or genius, but through ruthless deals, charm that bordered on manipulation, and a hunger for status that never stopped growing. By the time he was 35, Leo was a name whispered in boardrooms, a guest at charity galas, a man people envied. And I was his polished wife, the doctor, the mother, the proof of his respectability. On the outside, we were perfect. In Westchester County, our mansion stood like a trophy, every window glowing with wealth. To our neighbors, we were the Mitchells, the power couple, raising 2 bright children, hosting glittering dinner parties. But inside those walls, perfection was a performance. Leo's attention shifted from me long ago, his eyes lingering too long on his phone, his smile tightening when I spoke, his compliments withering into criticisms. The truth revealed itself one ordinary evening. I had come home from a 12-hour shift, scrubs clinging to me with the faint smell of antiseptic and fatigue. The kids were at a friend's house, the house was unnervingly quiet, and Leo was in his study. His phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, screen lighting up with a preview of a message. I shouldn't have looked. But I did. And I saw her name. Brittany Cole. His secretary. The message wasn't innocent. Not even close. It was a photo, intimate, explicit, and words that made my chest constrict as though someone had wrapped icy hands around my ribs. In that moment, the world tilted, every sacrifice I'd made collapsing like a poorly built house of cards. He wasn't just unfaithful. He was careless. Arrogant enough to think he could humiliate me under my own roof. I didn't confront him that night. Doctors are trained to stay calm in chaos, to steady their hands while blood pours, to diagnose with precision while panic screams around them. I slipped the phone back onto the counter, smiled when he emerged to kiss my cheek, and stored the image in my mind like a specimen under glass. Leo thought he had 48 hours before I would break. That's what most men think when they betray their wives: that shock will cripple, that grief will consume, that anger will burn and then fade. They don't expect strategy. They don't expect patience. They don't expect me. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of our too-perfect bedroom, listening to the rain against the windows. I thought of the oath I had taken as a doctor, to preserve life, to protect, to do no harm. That oath never covered betrayal. It never covered a husband's lies. By morning, I had a plan. Leo's empire was built on reputation, connections, and money. All fragile things. And unlike him, I wasn't careless. My world was one of data, networks, and meticulous records. My mind was trained to find weakness, diagnose flaws, cut precisely where it mattered most. He didn't know it yet, but I had 48 hours. 48 hours to take apart everything he had built and expose him to the world. I kissed him goodbye that morning as he left for work, his cologne clinging to my skin like a bitter perfume. He thought he was leaving behind a dutiful wife, oblivious and broken. He didn't see the steel beneath my smile. He didn't know that his prescription had already been written. And this time, I wasn't here to heal. I was here to destroy. The first rule of medicine is observation. Before you act, before you cut, you study. You look for the patterns, the subtle signs others miss. Leo had always underestimated my ability to notice things, small details, tiny inconsistencies, but those details were the difference between saving a life and losing one. Now, they were the difference between my silence and his destruction. Day one began not with rage but with precision. I wasn't going to scream, throw things, or beg him to explain. I was going to gather. Observe. Diagnose his weaknesses and chart the arteries of his empire. Every system has a point of failure. I just needed to find it. Leo left early, dressed in one of his tailored navy suits, tie sharp, hair combed back with surgical neatness. To anyone else, he looked untouchable. To me, he looked like a patient in denial, a man walking into the operating room without knowing the scalpel was already hovering above his chest. As soon as his car disappeared down the driveway, I went to work. The first stop, his study. Leo wasn't careless with everything. His contracts and financial files were locked behind passwords and encrypted folders. But I wasn't just his wife, I was the woman who had built his passwords with him years ago. His mother's maiden name. Our children's birthdays. The year he signed his first major deal. He thought sophistication was enough, but arrogance blinds men like him. It didn't take long before I was inside. Emails. Bank statements. Text message backups. The sheer volume was staggering. But as I sifted, the picture sharpened. He had been funneling money from our joint accounts into a separate card, lavish hotel stays, jewelry purchases, business dinners that matched up suspiciously with Brittany's Instagram check-ins. He wasn't just cheating. He was financing her lifestyle with the money I had helped earn. That discovery would have shattered me once. But now it only steadied me. I made copies. Flash drives. Secure folders on my hospital account. Evidence, neatly organized like case files. Enough to sink him if I chose. But I wasn't done. By midday, I was on the phone, calling in favors from people who owed me. Medicine makes allies in unexpected places, hospital administrators who dined with executives, insurance directors who whispered about coverage gaps, fellow doctors whose spouses worked in finance. I kept my tone light, professional, casual, just another doctor making inquiries. But each conversation was a vein, leading me deeper into Leo's vulnerabilities. One colleague mentioned a rumor: Leo's firm was under quiet investigation for mishandling client funds. Nothing public yet, but fragile enough that any scandal could tip the scales. Another hinted that Brittany had been filing suspicious insurance claims through the company account. Reckless. Predictable. I documented everything. Names. Dates. Numbers. Like assembling a medical history, I laid the pieces in order, looking for the diagnosis. And then came the call that nearly made me smile. Olivia Hayes. Wife of Victor Hayes, Leo's longtime business partner. Olivia and I had always circled one another politely at galas, exchanging compliments over champagne, both knowing we were pawns in our husbands' games. But beneath her perfect smile, Olivia was a woman who enjoyed information almost as much as I did. I heard you might need some clarity, she said smoothly when I asked about Leo's recent late nights. Men like our husbands think they're clever, but they forget that secretaries talk. And Brittany? She doesn't exactly keep her voice down. Olivia didn't give me everything, but she gave me enough: the times, the hotel, the names of clients who had been entertained while Leo was otherwise occupied. She didn't ask why I wanted to know. She didn't need to. By the time evening fell, I had an arsenal. Financial misconduct. Corporate whispers. A mistress careless with her lies. I stood in our kitchen, staring at the neatly stacked folders and flash drives, and felt the weight of control settle in my hands. Leo thought I would crumble. That betrayal would make me weak. But standing there, I felt stronger than I had in years. That night, when he returned home, he kissed me on the cheek as though nothing had changed. He poured himself a drink, loosened his tie, and sat across from me at the dinner table with the smug ease of a man who believed he was untouchable. I smiled back. I even asked about his day, listening as he spun half-truths and empty boasts. All the while, the evidence sat hidden in plain sight, just beneath the polished wood of the dining table. Doctors know when to act. Timing is everything. A cut too early, and the patient bleeds out. A cut too late, and the disease spreads. Day 1 was about gathering. Day 2 would be about cutting. And when I cut, I would cut deep. The second morning dawned gray, heavy clouds pressing against the horizon as if the sky itself were holding its breath. Perfect. Day 1 had been about diagnosis, gathering every symptom, every hidden fracture in Leo's carefully built facade. Day 2 was about incision, precise, decisive, irreversible. I rose before Leo, moving quietly through the house like I had 100 times before. But this time I wasn't packing lunches or reviewing charts before my shift. I was sharpening the blade. The first cut was professional. I started with his emails, the ones I'd pulled from his locked folders. Incriminating, careless, arrogant. He'd approved expense reports that clearly disguised hotel stays with Brittany as client dinners. He'd charged luxury gifts to the firm's corporate card. Each file was a wound waiting to be opened. I drafted an anonymous package, carefully worded, clean, professional. No emotions, no hints of vengeance. Just facts. Documentation. Receipts. I sent it to Victor Hayes, his partner, and blind copied 3 members of the firm's board. Attached was a note. You may wish to review the following before it becomes a liability. No signature. No trace. The second cut was deeper. I contacted his largest client, a hedge fund manager named Robert Chin, whose family I'd treated at the hospital more than once. I called his wife first, under the pretense of checking on their son's recovery after a routine surgery. I asked after Robert, then hesitated, letting the pause hang like a diagnosis unspoken. It's not my place, I said carefully, but you may want to ask your husband about the Mitchell firm's practices. There are rumors. I didn't accuse. I didn't need to. Doubt is its own kind of poison, slow but fatal. By mid-morning, the messages had begun to ripple. Olivia Hayes sent me a single text, he's wobbling. Brilliant. I smiled at the screen. The third cut was public. At lunchtime, I uploaded a carefully curated folder of documents, redacted names, but clear trails of misconduct, to an anonymous Dropbox link. I then created a new Twitter account, followed by several finance gossip pages, and sent the link with a single line, what happens behind the Mitchell name. The digital world doesn't need confirmation. It thrives on smoke before fire. By the time Leo sat down for his afternoon meetings, whispers were already spreading across LinkedIn, Discord groups, even finance subreddits. A scandal doesn't need to be proven before it destroys. It just needs oxygen. And I had given it plenty. By the time Leo came home that evening, his tie was loose, his jaw tight, his phone buzzing endlessly in his pocket. He poured a double scotch before even taking off his shoes. Rough day? I asked softly, as if I didn't already know. He shot me a look, the kind of look that once would have silenced me. But not anymore. Someone's spreading lies, he muttered. Board members breathing down my neck, clients acting jumpy. It's bullshit, all of it. Competitors trying to drag my name. I tilted my head, concern painted perfectly across my face. That sounds awful, Leo. He downed the drink in one swallow. The arrogance in him still lived, though it hadn't yet registered that the walls were closing in. Men like Leo never believe they can fall. Not until they hit the floor. That night, I lay awake beside him, listening to his shallow, restless breathing. He dreamed of losses and betrayals, his subconscious already whispering what his pride refused to admit. But this was only the first incision. Tomorrow, the cuts would go deeper. Professional destruction was only the beginning. Day 3, I would move from the boardroom to the living room. From the world he valued most, to the world he thought he controlled. If day 2 was about cutting into Leo's professional arteries, day 3 was about bleeding out his pride. Status wasn't just Leo's obsession, it was his oxygen. Take away his reputation, and he would suffocate in front of everyone he had ever tried to impress. The morning began with quiet precision. Over coffee, I scrolled through his phone again, revisiting the endless stream of messages between him and Brittany. I wasn't looking for shock this time, I'd seen enough to make bile rise in my throat. I was looking for tools. Names. Dates. Words that, in the right context, could become weapons. By 8 o'clock, I had assembled my delivery system, a single group email. The recipients, his family, my family, our mutual friends, his business associates, and even Brittany herself. 47 people in total. I hesitated only once, my finger hovering over send. This wasn't medicine anymore. It wasn't clinical. It was messy, emotional, human. But then I remembered the image of Brittany's text message lighting up in my kitchen, the way Leo kissed me minutes later as though I were a prop, a placeholder. I pressed send. The subject line was simple, for transparency. Inside the email was not a rant, not a scream. Just attachments. Screenshots of texts, photos of receipts, excerpts from hotel bookings. Enough to tell a story without a single extra word from me. By noon, the responses began flooding in. My sister called first. "Lauren, oh my God. Are you okay?" I answered calmly, my voice steady. "I'm fine. More than fine." Victor Hayes sent no email, but Olivia did. 2 words, "He's finished." Brittany never replied, though I imagined her face as she scrolled, realizing her secrets weren't secrets anymore. Her name was now public currency, whispered with disgust at brunch tables and family gatherings. And then came Leo. He stormed through the door early that afternoon, his face a mask of rage. His voice cracked like thunder as he slammed his phone onto the counter. "What the hell did you do, Lauren?" I looked up from the kitchen island, where I'd been calmly reviewing medical notes for an upcoming surgery. "I don't know what you mean." His laugh was sharp, humorless. "Don't play innocent. My mother called me in tears. My father won't even pick up the phone. Do you have any idea what you've done?" I closed the folder in front of me, folding my hands. "I've given people the truth. Isn't that what you always said we should value, Leo? Transparency?" His jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might shatter. For a moment, I saw the fear behind his anger, the realization that his carefully curated image was no longer under his control. "Do you think this makes you strong?" he hissed. "Do you think anyone will side with you after this circus?" I leaned forward, my voice soft but sharp as a scalpel. "I don't need them to side with me, Leo. I just need them to see you. The real you." The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that swallows a room whole. He turned away, pacing like a caged animal, muttering curses under his breath. That evening, the humiliation deepened. We attended a dinner, one he insisted we couldn't skip, despite the scandal simmering across everyone's phones. The moment we entered the restaurant, heads turned. Conversations hushed. His colleagues greeted me warmly, almost pityingly, while offering Leo only stiff nods. At the table, I played my role flawlessly, gracious, calm, the devoted wife standing by her husband in crisis. Every smile, every polite word I offered was another twist of the knife. He sat rigid, sweat gathering at his temples, as whispers passed like wildfire through the room. And then, as dessert was served, the final humiliation of the night arrived. Olivia leaned in across the table, her voice carrying just enough to be overheard. "Leo," she said sweetly, "I think Brittany left her necklace at your office. You might want to be more careful about where you store things." The table went silent. The color drained from his face. I hid my smile behind a sip of wine. By the time we left, Leo's hand was a vice around my arm, his voice a low growl as he guided me to the car. "This isn't over," he warned. He was right. It wasn't over. But what he didn't understand was that he was no longer the one writing the ending. Day 3 wasn't just humiliation. It was amputation. He had lost his grip on his friends, his family, his social standing. And tomorrow, I would cut into the heart of what he valued most. His money. Money was Leo's blood supply. It kept his ego alive, his business running, his mistress clothed in silk. Without it, he was just another man, ordinary, vulnerable, desperate. Day 4 was about severing the artery. I began early, long before sunrise, sitting at my desk with the glow of my laptop and a steaming mug of coffee. The children were asleep upstairs, the house still, the storm of the last 2 days humming like static in the background. Leo had left his wallet and briefcase on the counter the night before, too distracted to remember them. One look at the credit cards, the accounts I was already linked to, and I knew exactly where to cut. First came the joint accounts. I transferred every penny, legally mine to touch, into a separate account in my name. Years of savings, investments, safety nets, all flowing like blood into my veins. By the time the sun broke the horizon, the accounts were clean. Empty. Next, the cards. I called the banks, my voice calm and practiced, the voice of a doctor explaining a medical emergency. I reported the cards lost, requested cancellations, asked for replacements sent to me directly. His access to instant cash vanished with a few keystrokes. Then came the mortgage, the insurance, the business expenses tied to my name. Each one severed. Frozen. When the banks asked for reasons, I gave them medical expenses, unfamiliar charges, suspected fraud. Words that triggered protocols, red flags, delays. By mid-morning, Leo's lifeline was a corpse. But I wasn't finished. I picked up the phone and called a contact at the hospital, a friend who worked in medical insurance. "I need a professional favor," I said lightly, as though I were asking about a colleague's schedule. Within hours, she had flagged Brittany's suspicious claims, the ones Leo had been approving. Fraudulent activity. Enough to trigger an internal investigation at his firm. The dominoes were already lined up. I only had to tap them. By noon, I'd sent an anonymous tip to the firm's compliance officer, attaching Brittany's claims, the hotel receipts, and a quiet suggestion that perhaps company funds were being used for personal services. The kind of language HR departments couldn't ignore. By 3 o'clock, I received confirmation in the form of silence. Leo's phone stopped buzzing. For 2 days it had been a constant vibration in his pocket, emails and calls piling up. Now, nothing. The silence of a man cut off from his kingdom. When he came home that evening, he didn't storm through the door like he had the day before. He walked in slowly, shoulders heavy, tie hanging loose around his neck. He didn't look like the Leo Mitchell the world knew. He looked like a man gutted. He went straight to the liquor cabinet, pouring a drink with trembling hands. His eyes flicked to me across the room, suspicion lurking behind the exhaustion. "You touched the accounts," he said finally, his voice low. I set down the medical journal I'd been reading. They were joint accounts, Leo. My name was on them. I needed to protect myself and the kids. His laugh was hollow, bitter. "You think you're clever? Do you have any idea what you've done?" I met his gaze, steady, unblinking. "Yes. For once, Leo, I know exactly what I've done." He slammed the glass down on the counter, shattering it, amber liquid spilling across the marble. Shards scattered at his feet, and for a moment I thought he might step toward me, anger boiling over. But he didn't. He just stood there, breathing hard, chest rising and falling like a trapped animal. "You won't win," he muttered. "I'll rebuild. I always rebuild." I leaned back in my chair, a small, cold smile playing at my lips. "Then you better start soon. Because by tomorrow, there won't be anything left to rebuild." He stared at me, and for the first time, I saw it clearly: fear. Not anger. Not arrogance. Fear. That night, as he tossed restlessly in bed, I lay still beside him, eyes open in the dark. The financial hemorrhage was only the fifth incision. 2 more cuts remained. The deepest wounds weren't about money or power. They were about legacy. Tomorrow, I would take his mistress. And then, his children. Day 5 wasn't about money. It wasn't about paperwork, or accounts, or contracts. Day 5 was about people. About faces, reputations, whispers in corridors. About ensuring Leo Mitchell could never again walk into a room without everyone knowing the filth he dragged behind him. And the sharpest weapon in that arsenal was Brittany. Brittany Hayes had been Leo's secretary for nearly 3 years, though she preferred the title executive assistant. Young, ambitious, the kind of woman who believed proximity to power would eventually make her powerful herself. She thought she'd won. She thought Leo was her ticket out of her small-town past, into a life of fine dining and designer handbags. But in reality, she was just another liability. And I was about to turn her into a bomb. It started with the medical file. A quiet favor from a nurse in OB/GYN who owed me more than one late-night shift. She pulled Brittany's routine labs, confidential, yes, but accessible with the right whispers. Positive pregnancy test. Approximately 8 weeks. I stared at the report for a long moment, 1,000 calculations spinning in my mind. It was his. It had to be. Leo's arrogance wouldn't have allowed any protection, not when he believed he was untouchable. I printed the report and slipped it into a plain white envelope. Evidence. Proof. The kind that destroyed not just reputations, but legacies. By mid-morning, I set my plan in motion. First, I invited 3 women for lunch at a quiet cafe near the hospital. Not just any women, these were the wives of Leo's biggest business partners. Women who carried the invisible threads of social power in Greenwich. They arrived polished, their pearls gleaming, their lips painted in shades of practiced indifference. I spoke as a doctor, not as a wife. Calm, clinical, detached. Brittany Hayes has been under medical care. She's pregnant. I think it's important you know, the father is Leo. There was silence, then the sharp intake of breath, the exchange of glances. Not pity for me, no, worse. Judgment for him. They didn't care about my pain, they cared about the disease of scandal infecting their carefully curated social circle. By the time lunch ended, the news was already a wildfire. At 2 p.m., I placed the envelope into HR's mailbox at Leo's firm. No return name, just the report. A sticky note. Workplace harassment and pregnancy. Consider the liability. Doctors carried weight. Medical records carried weight. HR couldn't ignore it, not in today's climate. By the time Leo walked into the office that afternoon, whispers had already curdled into accusations. The real beauty came later, when Brittany herself became aware. I called her, not as a rival, not as a wife, but as a physician. My tone was gentle, authoritative, professional. "Brittany, this is Dr. Lauren Mitchell. I've reviewed your recent labs. You're pregnant." A long pause. Then a shaky, I didn't think. "Does Leo know?" I asked softly. Her silence was answer enough. "You need medical support," I continued. "But you also need legal protection. Leo will not stand beside you once this is public. He will abandon you. I can help." That was the masterstroke. planting the seed of betrayal in her mind before Leo could spin his lies. By the time she confronted him, she would already see him as the villain. That evening, I executed the social nuclear option. I organized what looked like a small dinner at a mutual friend's home. 15 guests, all part of Leo's tight circle. Wine flowed, laughter echoed, everything perfectly normal, until the final course. That's when I stood. Calm. Poised. Surgical. I wanted to thank everyone for coming tonight. And since you're all close to Leo, you deserve to hear this from me directly. I placed the envelope on the table, sliding the report into the candlelight. Leo's secretary, Brittany Hayes, is pregnant. The father is Leo. I thought transparency would save us all the awkwardness of finding out in whispers. The silence that followed was a scalpel. Sharp. Precise. Leo's face drained of color, his fork clattering to the plate. Murmurs spread like cracks in glass. Some faces turned toward me with pity, others toward him with disgust. But the one that mattered most to Leo's was pure panic. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. Don't bother, Leo. The evidence is indisputable. And the truth always finds its way to the surface. Later that night, after the guests had fled and the house was quiet again, Leo stormed into our bedroom. You vindictive. Careful, I said, my voice low but deadly. The children are asleep. His chest heaved, veins standing out in his neck. Do you realize what you've done? You've destroyed me. No, Leo. You destroyed yourself. I just showed everyone the body. He looked at me then, not as his wife, not as his victim, but as something far more dangerous, his executioner. And I wasn't finished. Tomorrow, I would take the final piece. Our children. Children see more than we give them credit for. They notice the silences, the slammed doors, the way a father's laughter feels hollow, and a mother's smile hides storms. Emma and Noah had lived in the shadow of Leo Mitchell's empire long enough to understand that something wasn't right. And on day 6, I decided it was time to protect them. To make them the center of my world, and to take them away from his. That morning, I scheduled routine medical evaluations for both kids at the hospital. It wasn't routine at all, it was documentation. Clinical notes. Evidence. A paper trail. Emma, 12, bright-eyed, already suspicious of her father's late meetings. Noah, 8, quieter, but with a nervous tic that had grown worse since Leo's outbursts at home. I guided them through the checkup, careful, professional. Not just their mother, but their doctor. I asked questions gently but precisely. Do you feel safe at home? Do your parents argue often? Do you feel stressed when your father is around? The answers were telling. Subtle, but enough. Emma hesitated before answering, eyes flicking toward me like she was searching for permission. Noah fidgeted with his shoelaces, his voice barely above a whisper. I wrote it all down. Clinical language. Objective. Unbiased. But layered with the undeniable truth, Leo Mitchell's behavior was damaging his children. By midday, I had the reports scanned and encrypted. I sent them directly to a family lawyer I trusted, one who specialized in high-stakes custody battles. Her reply came quickly, this is powerful evidence. With your career stability and documented concerns, you'll have the upper hand in court. Especially once his affair and workplace misconduct surface. I didn't need to wait for court. The point wasn't a legal victory, it was the psychological knife of knowing I could take his children away at any moment. That evening, I chose not to hide. Over takeout pizza at the kitchen island, I looked Leo directly in the eye while Noah and Emma sat between us. Leo, I said, calmly slicing into my salad, I took the kids for their checkups today. Their charts will be very useful. He froze, fork halfway to his mouth. Useful for what? Custody, I answered simply. Emma blinked, confused. Noah glanced between us, sensing the tension. Leo forced a laugh, trying to keep the facade alive for the kids. Lauren, don't be dramatic. I leaned closer, my voice cold but steady. I'm not being dramatic. I'm being precise. Courts don't care about affairs. But they care about children's welfare. And Leo, you've given me all the ammunition I need. His smile faltered. For the first time, he realized the depth of the trap. Later that night, when the children were asleep, he confronted me in the hallway. His voice was low, desperate. You wouldn't take them from me. They're my kids. I didn't flinch. They're mine too. And unlike you, I know how to keep them safe. He reached out, gripping my arm, but I pulled away. Do you know what makes this so perfect? I whispered. Even if the judge doesn't grant me full custody, even if we share them, I will still be the parent they trust. The one they remember as steady. You'll be the parent who betrayed them. That's a prison no court can free you from. Leo's face twisted, torn between rage and fear. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. For once, the businessman, the dealmaker, the manipulator, had no words. The next morning, Emma slipped a note under my bedroom door. Just a scrap of notebook paper, her handwriting uneven. Mom, I don't want to be like Dad. I'm glad you're strong. I pressed the note to my chest, tears burning behind my eyes. This was more than revenge now. It was transformation. For me. For them. Leo thought I was destroying him. But in truth, I was saving us. That evening, before bed, I stood in the doorway of Leo's study. He was slumped at his desk, tie loosened, whiskey glass in hand, staring at nothing. You wanted power, I said quietly. You wanted control. But you underestimated me, Leo. You underestimated what a mother will do for her children. He didn't look up. His silence was answer enough. I let the moment linger, then added, tomorrow ends it. Completely. And then I walked away, leaving him in the ruins of the empire he had built on lies. The final day of my plan arrived with eerie calm. No adrenaline. No trembling hands. Just the steady, clinical composure of a surgeon before a delicate operation. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the architect. Leo thought he still had options. He thought money or charm could patch the bleeding holes in his empire. He didn't realize the hemorrhage was irreversible. I chose the setting with care, the boardroom of Leo's firm. A meeting he couldn't skip, with executives, investors, and partners in attendance. He expected to smooth things over, to offer apologies wrapped in charm, to keep the empire afloat. But when I walked into that room uninvited, but unstoppable, the air shifted. Every head turned. Leo's jaw clenched, his hand tightening on the edge of the table. Lauren, he hissed. This isn't your place. I smiled faintly. On the contrary, Leo. It's exactly my place. Because the truth belongs everywhere. I placed a leather folder on the polished table. Inside, everything. Bank statements showing funds siphoned from joint accounts into Brittany's luxury purchases. HR complaints filed about workplace harassment. The medical record confirming Brittany's pregnancy. My children's clinical notes documenting the stress of living under his volatile shadow. Each page landed like a scalpel stroke, carving away his last defenses. This, I said clearly, my voice calm and unwavering, is Leo Mitchell. Not the polished businessman you admire. Not the devoted husband he pretended to be. This is the man who embezzled, harassed, and betrayed everyone in this room. Leo shot to his feet, face red, veins pulsing. You vindictive. But before he could finish, Brittany's voice cut through the room. Trembling, furious, she stepped from the corner where she'd been summoned. She's right, Brittany said, tears streaking her mascara. He promised me everything. And now I'm pregnant, and he told me to get rid of it, because I was bad for his image. Gasps rippled through the room. The damage was nuclear. In seconds, Leo's empire crumbled. Investors muttered about lawsuits. Partners exchanged glances of disgust. One executive pushed his chair back, whispering, "We can't have him leading us through this." And Leo, once the master manipulator, stood frozen, sweat trickling down his temple, powerless. I leaned closer, my voice low enough for only him to hear. "Do you see it now? This wasn't rage. It wasn't chaos. This was surgery. I cut away every lie you built until there was nothing left but the truth." He sank back into his chair, defeated, staring at the wreckage of his kingdom. After the meeting, I found him alone in the corridor. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. For the first time in years, he looked small. I handed him a single sheet of paper, custody arrangements, drafted by my lawyer. "Sign it," I said. "Or I'll make sure every detail of today reaches the front page by morning." His hand trembled as he scrawled his name. He didn't even try to fight. That night, I sat with Emma and Noah on the porch. The late summer air was warm, the crickets singing. "Things will be different now," I told them softly. "But we'll be okay. Because we have each other." Emma leaned against me, slipping her small hand into mine. Noah rested his head on my shoulder. "Mom," Emma whispered, "I'm proud of you." Those 4 words cut deeper than any revenge ever could. They were the antidote to every wound Leo had left behind. Later, in the silence of my room, I wrote the last note in my journal. The words that closed this chapter forever. I took an oath to heal, to do no harm. But Leo Mitchell was never my patient. He was my husband. And for husbands who break their vows, there is only one prescription: truth. Administered in precise, devastating doses. The treatment is complete. The disease is gone. And I am free. I closed the journal, exhaled, and smiled for the first time in months. Because revenge wasn't destruction. It was liberation. And I was finally alive.